All right, so this video is about the secret government project called Looking Glass. And this is a great video for those of you out there who don't have a background with this, don't know anything about it, because I have compiled all of the whistleblowers who have mentioned this project into this one video. So you're going to get to see it all in a fire hose, and you're going to get it all at once. It's going to be exactly what you need to get caught up. We're going to look at three different whistleblowers, and we're going to hear parts of their testimony selected and compiled together. So you may not hear everything that these three guys said about Looking Glass, but you're going to get all of the major information, all of the important stuff, so that after this video you're going to know exactly what the project was about, how it started, where it is, and what they use it for, and why it's important, especially considering what's going on in the world right now. And so you've got to bear with me a little bit. I've collected these clips, but I think the audio adjustment level is not perfect on all of them. You may have to adjust your audio as some of these clips go in and out, just slightly. I think they're mostly pretty good, but just be aware of that. So we're going to start with a man named Bob Lazar. Now, Bob Lazar first became a whistleblower in 1988, where he came out on the news actually and said that he had been a worker at not just Area 51, but a base named S4, which was an underground base near Area 51. And here is a testimony of his from 1989, just that 1 year later, about where he mentions Project Looking Glass. Now, he didn't have direct experience with that project, but he had seen briefing documents on it, so that's what he mentions here.
Could you briefly describe Project Looking Glass and Project Sidekick for us?
Project Sidekick was another project going on with Galileo. Galileo was the project that I was involved in. Sidekick dealt with any of the weapon potential of the craft, whether or not the craft had a weapon in it or could it be used as a weapon, but it had something to do with some sort of particle beam configuration where the gravity generator can be used as a lens to focus a weapon of some sort, similar to the SDI device we were working on in the 80s, but with the potential of a focusing device using the gravity generator.
And Project Looking Glass?
Project Looking Glass dealt with the distortion, the fact that there's a time distortion, essentially looking back in time, and by that I do not mean looking back years ago to see the wagon train days. They're looking for distortions that are milliseconds in time, and what that was used for, I don't know, but that was just observing the time, the time distortion, time dilation phenomena of the craft in operation.
So there you have it, Bob Lazar in 1989 giving the information that he knew about Project Looking Glass was just that it was based on time distortion. And so I'm going to now show you another clip. He doesn't give any more information, but I wanted to show you this clip. It's an interview he did with Joe Rogan, and not too many years ago. I don't know if it was in the past 2 years or something like that. But this will let you know that his story has not changed about this project in 30 years, and I think that says something about his credibility. So here's that clip.
Again, the only thing I could verify was what I had my hands on. There was talk of weapon systems, that there were different projects. Project Galileo, Project Sidekick was supposed to be weapon applications of the craft. Project Looking Glass had to do with time, any effects of time in the craft. Now, I don't think we're not talking about making a time machine like in science fiction, but we're talking about, small distortions, intentional distortions of time, and how that can be used, as a, not as a, well, it was part of a weapon program.
How were you informed in this about
These,
this?
again, were just the small briefings that I read.
All right, so there he again reaffirms that he had access to some briefings at one point during his employment at S4, the base near Area 51, where he saw these documents about Project Looking Glass, and all he knew was that it had to do with time and time distortion. And so that at least is our first whistleblower, and he came out again in the 1980s with this information. Now we're going to go on to a different whistleblower. His name is Dan Burish, who also had experience with the project. And so here is a clip of Dan Burish introducing himself in an interview with Project Camelot, which is, you can look them up too if you get interested in this. But here you go.
I'm a microbiologist, a retired one now, but continuing somewhat the practice involved in a very unusual project called Lotus. I am a 20-year retiree from Majestic, first having been brought in 1986 under the auspices of the Committee of the Majority, and specifically working for the Majestic 12, assigned to Project Aquarius.
All right, now he's going to actually explain where the project originated from.
Okay, so this looking glass technology comes from cylinder seals.
Originally, yes.
How?
Originally, it was a series of instructions for accessing the wormholes which naturally pass in the hyperspace in which we find ourselves. And from there, they worked on the technology. They built the equipment from the instructions. After building the equipment from the instructions, they began to tweak it and find different things out about it. One of the things that they found is that they could actually use it as a peering portal, like a peering glass, if you will, to see different aspects of not only the future but the past.
Are these
And
Sumerian?
I would say that they slightly predate the Sumerian time frame, but that some of the information which came down from cylinder seals that slightly predated the Sumerian time frame were then recopied in Sumerian seals as well. And
Egyptian?
those cylinder seals, oh yes, and those cylinder seals, to the best of my knowledge, have all been obtained.
From Iraq.
Some of them from Iraq, yes.
Some of them from
Some of
Egypt?
them from Egypt, some of them from other countries where they were being stored.
And
I really don't want to get my country into too many problems here.
and you've got go ahead.
For a second, it's
All right, so he explained there that the initial plans for the project Looking Glass came from Sumerian or, Mesopotamian cylinder seals that had been found by various governments, and then equipment put together based on those plans. And now here's another clip where he's explaining a little bit about the location of the stargates or portals, as he calls them, related to Project Looking Glass and what has happened to them over the time.
Well, we had Looking Glass technology and portal, actual Stargate technology in Iraq as late as the start of 2003. And a lot of countries didn't want us to enter Iraq. We did though, didn't we?
Right. But how is it that, in other words, it sounds
Muammar
like...
just handed his two over. We just told him that we were going to make him rich beyond avarice. And he was a little smarter than Saddam, that's all. And so what he did is he handed them over and says, "Oh, please come into my country." He says, look at my my equipment to make sure that I'm not making any weapons of mass destruction. Meanwhile, out the back door goes the two that Saddam actually had transferred over to him.
Cylinders.
Equipment,
Stargate.
activating technology, for them to experiment with. They were experimenting.
But if the looking glass technology is the same thing, is access as a wormhole. The technology
Essentially, it
accesses
does,
a worm.
yes.
It also accesses stargates.
Well, that's essentially the same thing. I've been using the term Stargate
Stargates
technology as
occur-
meaning a machine that accesses a wormhole by spreading out the energy, the strange matter, or whatever it is, and I'm not a physicist, that spreads it out in a compatible way to either communicate through it or passage of information. And that includes also
But it
physical
occurs.
life.
It occurs naturally. Stargates occur naturally.
Indeed, they do.
All right, so just a little more information there about the Stargate technology, the Project Looking Glass technology. And I just wanted to mention, I'd forgotten earlier, but these interviews, Dan did a few interviews with Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot. over a few years. I believe this one was about 2006 is when he did this interview and came out with this information. Props to Carrie Cassidy. She's been devoting her life to this type of thing for a long time. So I encourage you to look her up if you want more information. One more clip from Dan Burish. He's going to talk about some of the things they saw as they started using Project Looking Glass and using it for trying to predict future outcomes. So let's take a look at that.
The numbers that we received before the Looking Glass was shut down, dismantled, was that there would be a 19% probability with an 85% confidence that the disaster would occur, that there would be a transitioning from timeline 1 to timeline 2. But that then means that there's an 81% chance that it won't. And so the individuals who want to carry the negative, I'm convinced that it's going to occur, are not presenting the facts. The facts are, this is the material that we have available that we know.
So what you're saying is the Illuminati, to get back to that thread,
Yes.
is basically the side that believes that the transition is going to occur from one timeline to the other.
Not only do they believe that it will occur, they want to provoke it.
But how does it benefit them to believe?
All right, so that shows you a little bit, and I realized there that there's not a lot of background for what he's saying in this little clip, but I didn't add more here because we're going to see in the next whistleblower, whose name is Bill Wood, he's going to really expound on this timeline idea and the things they saw about a catastrophic future versus a awakening or enlightenment type of future. And so that's coming, but know that it's not going to stay where it is. You're going to learn a lot more about that in just a minute. Now, I wanted you to see that Dan Burish actually collaborated with a few different researchers because, of course, once he came out with this information, everybody was interested in hearing about it. And as he collaborated, a few different artists put together renderings of the Looking Glass machine, if you will, based on Dan Burish's testimony. So here is one rendering that someone did in a 3D CAD program of the Looking Glass machine. Here are some better ones that were done as well with some nice 3D CGI graphics. And these are just different views of that. And these are on the internet. You can find all these. It's just I've compiled them all here in this video for you. So there you go. And if I remember correctly, as he told about this thing, this produced and used an argon mist in the middle to and somehow used, I think, supercooled liquids in helixes or spinning around the center of this thing to create the time distortion, the distortions that they were able then to hook up to computers, to machines, and then calculate probabilities of future events based on inputs of decisions. And so they would, set all this up and then run it through the system and see what the outcomes were going to be in an effort to predict future events. And that is kind of how that this is explained to have worked, had been explained to work. So now moving on to the third whistleblower, and these are the only whistleblowers I know of that have actually come out and are, credible on this topic. But this third whistleblower's name is Bill Wood, and he again is interviewed by Project Camelot's Carrie Cassidy. She's done a great job with all these people, getting them out in the open. But first we're going to learn just a little bit about Bill Wood, who he says he is, so you at least see that.
Basically, my military career was such that I was in the United States Navy from June of 1991 until June of 2001. In that time, I served in a special unit called SEAL Team 9. We were trained primarily to use us as an asset to control and handle Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles, that were used inside the Persian Gulf region in the Middle East throughout the time frame of 1992 to 2000, to my knowledge.
All right, so that's just a little background on who he is, what his military experience was. But now he's going to talk about, in this next clip, about how he was contacted by some white hat ex-military people, a secret group, classified, who needed his help with Project Looking Glass. So that's what's in this clip.
Shortly after I began doing that, I was contacted by a group of people that were also doing the exact same thing, and were much more aware of who I was and what my experience in the military was on a top secret level. I was very surprised by that. But I learned very quickly that there's people out there with a huge amount of information that are fighting for the good guys.
Okay, so in essence, you were contacted by a group of what we call white hats.
White hats, I call them oath keepers, but essentially they're the patriots that our government would classify as terrorists.
Okay. But they are ex-military by and large, and some of them are still in the military.
I would assume a large number are still in the military or the government, in the FBI, Secret Service, CIA, any alphabet agency. There's got to be a percentage of people that are seeing the day-to-day and going, this is wrong, we got to do something. One of the caveats that I do have some personal information that I did get personally involved in was some information that had to do with the Stargates and Looking Glass, and more specifically the 2012 problem with those projects. I guess, popular opinion of what's out there right now is that the project was shut down because there was a problem when we approached 2012. I've heard it described a number of ways, but to my knowledge, the problem is that the timelines converge on that point in time. And when you know enough about the Stargate projects and the Looking Glass project to know that how string theory works and how the possibility of possibilities works and how making one choice over here doesn't necessarily mean that the other choice couldn't exist at the same time. But once you get your brain wrapped around this subject, you find out that at the end of 2012, in an easy way to put it, the choices that we make become less and less consequential to the future. And eventually we're pushed into this bottleneck of time, no matter which choice we make. And that's important to the people that had access to Looking Glass, because they would use Looking Glass knowing the choices that they would make and the future would pop up. The big mistake was coming up with the possibility of future. And when we started using a computer to say, well, if we make this choice, it's 79% possible that this scenario happens, and 23% are possible, or whatever, I'm using round numbers, that this scenario would happen. The understanding at the time was that was realistic. However, if you go down the road further and free will continues to exercise itself on this game, that 79% possibility sometimes changes very, very fast. But if you look at the situation in a point of time, it seems very realistic that that's the greatest possibility. What happened was people, very smart people, began to figure out that something big was coming up. Something that made it so all the possibilities of all the future scenarios of any choice, any possibility that was fed in and observed through the looking glass inherently ended up in the same future. And no decision and no possibility changed past a certain point. That's the big secret.
Okay, so is that certainly 2020?
All right, so just to recap what we just saw, Bill expresses here that as he worked on this project and found out what had been done on it and started to get involved with it, he realized and saw that they had been running probabilities into the future for a while with this thing, and they kept finding that after 2012, every possibility that they fed in would always end up at the same event in the future from 2012. So as they would run these different scenarios time and time again, if they went past 2012, they would always converge in an event, some big happening that everything then coalesced into, and that no decision that was made prior to that point was going to change anything about that point in time. Now, he doesn't mention what point in time that is. I have thoughts on that I'm going to share at the end of this video, but just to kind of recap what he said there. And then next he's going to talk about how this singularity, this convergence of history that was coming up in the future from when they were using the device, and he's talking in about, I think this interview is in about 2009, and he had been working on the project, I think in the very late 90s is when he said earlier in this video that I didn't show that he had been working on the project. So let's listen to what he says about how the elites felt, the elites in the world got wind of what was going on and how they felt about it.
It well coincides with December 21st, 2012.
So at that point, all possibilities lead to the same
Timelines.
Rubicon.
All possible timelines lead to the same basic set of history in the future.
And what is that history to you? Did you know that, or did you find that out?
That is the big question. That is the big secret. That is what sends everybody that has all of the information, that knows everything, into a blind panic. The people that know everything about Looking Glass, that have gotten all the reports and all the information, the elites of the world, probably figured out that that was the end of the game, and nothing could be manipulated beyond that point.
So I'm just going to let it continue here. He continues talking about the contracting timelines and what that it means. So I may play through a few clips here in a row.
They cannot go beyond a certain point.
At a certain point, after they're done hearing the computer tell them this is what's going to happen over and over and over and over again, all they become focused on is how do we fix it?
Why? What is this that's going to happen?
The
You know that?
inevitable contraction of the timelines.
But what does that mean for this reality? Do you know that?
I don't know that. What I do know is that I was called in and asked to solve this problem, this timeline contraction problem. And I eventually did my due diligence and did all the investigating, and basically only had one piece of information, and that was reinforcement. The computer's right. The timelines will contract down to some inevitable thing that you guys won't tell me about, so I can't help you. There is an inevitable event. It's been forecast, it's been predicted, it's been fed to us in a slop trough of what they want us to believe will happen.
But they don't actually
However,
know.
they don't actually have control over what happens. They only have control over the reaction, and it seems that no matter what they try to do to cause their desired reaction, it's going to have an opposite effect. Now, it's much, much easier for me to explain today what that process is as opposed to back then. But if I had to give it a name, I would say it's the awakening process. It's an evolution of consciousness that cannot, will not, and no matter what decisions or possibilities are injected into the equation, eventually it all resolves down to us all learning the truth and becoming aware of this massive dam of lies that has been built that keep us from knowing massive volume of information that we should otherwise possess.
Now I want you to think about this for a minute, because what he said is key, and when I come full circle on this thing at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about it more, but just note that he said that this event that all of history is culminating towards, he even calls it an awakening. And if you are familiar with or have followed at all the Q phenomenon, the QAnon posts on, first 4chan, then now 8chan, then you may be aware of this term, the Great Awakening, which I myself and many others can contend is occurring right now, is in progress, and is going to get just huge as this year progresses and as time progresses. But that's what he's talking about. It's and he even said it, he talks about it in a couple ways. He talks in one way as if it's an enlightenment, like a consciousness raising, but he also says that it's just a revealing of the truth, right? It's understanding that there's been a dam of lies built up over the centuries, and this awakening is people coming to the knowledge of the truth, and that nothing can stop it. And that is what the elites saw when they looked in the Project Looking Glass and used the machine to run their probabilities. They saw this and were so afraid they couldn't even believe it. So they couldn't deal with it. So this is what scares them, and this is why they had been using this project again and again to try to see if there was some way to change that probability, but they couldn't do it. It's not going to change. And Bill is going to explain even more of that as we continue here.
That they would lose control.
Because that information was of a monumental concern when I was in the military about how to prevent this inevitability. Now, at first I thought it was end of the world. Now I see end of the world as end of their world.
Yeah, note that he said that, that the elites felt like it's the end of the world, but it's really the end of the charade that they've been playing on the people of Earth for centuries. And it's the revealing of truth that has been hidden for my whole lifetime, probably for many lifetimes. So that is what they're seeing through the project there. Now this part that I'm about to play for you is probably one of the most significant ones for me as a Christian to hear, because he talks about, well, I'll just play it, but he gets into some kind of almost eschatological type of discussion without even mentioning God, but you'll see what he says here.
Any attempts to try to go away from this one inevitable conclusion, I again see as a new beginning, an end of this reality, the beginning of something that we can't even possibly understand based on the level of our beliefs currently. But when all that information comes flooding out, there's going to be no denying what's true and what's a lie or what's illusion. We won't have the choice to believe that 9/11 happened because of a bunch of terrorists, because we'll know exactly what's happened. Basically what we're experiencing right now is two master chess players sitting at the board. And one of them looks down at the board and sees that he's in checkmate in 7 moves. And he looks across at his opponent, and he knows that his opponent sees it too. So there's no getting out of it. So at this point, the loser can only prolong the game. The game, both players know the game is over. It's only a matter of time before he does this, and then you're forced to do this, and then he's forced to do this, and eventually checkmate. We, as a race, if we could understand that the game is over, that based on the rules of the game, the bad guys have already lost, the good guys have already won. Yes, there's moves left on the table, but those moves are being forced by the player that is going to win. The only way that checkmate can't happen is if the player that's winning makes a mistake. But from all of the information that I've gathered, all of the information that's been given, all of the information that's been vetted to me, it seems pretty obvious that the good guy player on the side of the chessboard knows exactly what has to be done to win the game. And so at this point, any mistake would be all but impossible.
All right, now just, to recap that, but to just make a statement and say, man, that to me sounds just like God and Satan. And this is the final chess game, according to what he's saying. And they are playing it out, but like he says, the bad guy, Satan, doesn't have any moves he can make that will change the outcome. And that's what this Project Looking Glass is all about, is the elites using it to find out about that outcome, and they're freaking out. And they shut down the project because they couldn't see anything past that timeline convergence that God is masterminding. God is bringing all things to a logical conclusion, to his will. And so truth will be revealed by his power. And these two chess players are battling it out, but there's no move that's going to change the end of the game. And the good guy, as he says, God will win.
I was entrusted in getting it down to 2 possibilities. And I've heard both of those possibilities talked about in massive proportions, the good and the bad.
Okay, can you in one sentence say what the good was and the bad was, or are you able to do that?
To most easily put it to people,
I suppose.
One scenario is what most people would understand to be ascension, or an evolution of consciousness that brings us out of the cocoon and turns us into a butterfly. Timeline 2 is some kind of major global catastrophe that drives most of us underground and leaves a few of us on top to fend for ourselves.
And I just want to interject here too that the elites for years have been planning for this contingency, this disaster. And you know this by the fact that they've been building underground bases And the rich of the world have been building underground shelter homes. And if you do some research online, you will find this out, that they've been doing it for years, because the elites, the money holders, the power controllers of the world, they have had access to this technology because of their power and influence. And they, seeing this disaster on the horizon, or the possibility of it, they have essentially freaked out and started building underground to shelter themselves from this disaster. This is part of what the underground of the Denver airport is. It is a shelter for the elite of the world in case of a global disaster, a place where they can hide and stay safe while the rest are left to fend for themselves. And that's just how evil those people are. Let's continue on with the next clip here, the last clip of Bill Wood.
Can you explain why they have been hedging their bets to such a degree on the negative?
It's very simple. They're insane. And beyond insane, they have literally deluded themselves into believing that they can somehow manage to get away with what they're trying to get away with. There is a distinct lack of reality in that thinking.
And that's exactly what the elites of the world are, is deluded. And so that is the conclusion of Bill Wood's testimonies. Now you've seen now the 3 whistleblowers that I'm aware of that have actually come out with Project Looking Glass information. And now you know more about Project Looking Glass than 99.999% of people on this planet. But I'm going to show you something else, because the elite, the majority of the elite are Satanists. And they, in being Satanists, they not only are evil, but they also have a spiritual mandate. And it is something that it is a law of spiritual, and that is that they must reveal their wicked plans in what they do to those to whom they are doing them. They must ask, in a sense, permission to tear your life apart, to keep you in captivity and bondage, to rule over you in every conceivable way. So I'm going to play one clip more of Dan Burish talking about that a majority of the people that are involved with these projects are Illuminati and Freemasons and Satanists. And then I will show you some other revelations that Hollywood has actually done of Project Looking Glass.
I understand that there's been some kind of adjournment.
There has been.
And now there's a new body, and it's not going to be comprised of the same people as the old body.
True.
So why? Why have they changed members? What's the motivation?
There's a switchover between 2 secret societies going on. One is handing reins over to the other, and it has been long planned. However, it's not been long known by me, but it's been long planned, probably decades. I'm certain it has to have been for decades.
So Majestic is ruled by a secret society, is what you're saying?
Well, Majestic has been the most famous, next to probably the Freemasons, secret society of itself. And there are many of the Freemasons who inhabit the Majestic as a consequence of their relationships. The 2 things are happening at the same time. And so their philosophies then, the philosophies of these associated secret societies like the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, are then imparted into the secret society known as the Majestic.
So what's the quarrel between...
Because you bring who you are to wherever you are.
Sure. But what's the quarrel between, say, the Majestic Society or group and the Illuminati?
That is a real good, and it's the best question to be asked. Even more importantly than the differences between the J-Rods, because this impacts us I think, now. Many members of the upper echelon, and I don't mean the hard-working people who work on construction sites, for God's sakes, but many people who are in the upper echelon of the Masonic movement, both York and Scottish Rite, have accepted a philosophy which is Luciferian in context and history. Many of the people who are not directly then involved with the Majestic, who are also associated with that Luciferian philosophy, have rubbed up against each other for decades, probably even longer. So somewhere along the line in history, there was a schism between those individuals who have accepted a Luciferian history, Luciferian philosophy, mixed with other secret society people who have not, that ended up in the Majestic, and people who have accepted a Luciferian, almost like a different denomination, if you will, accepted a Luciferian philosophy, who are not associated with the Majestic. In other words, we've got dirty coins on both sides.
Okay. And when you say a Luciferian
Now,
philosophy,
meaning a materialistic, and for lack of a better term, when it comes to the actual European Illuminati, satanic philosophy, where they've given their lives, their families, their sacred honor to this satanic thought of creating a world order under the person that they consider the true God, which would be a Luciferian figure. Now, these people have also, separating them from the dirty coins in the Majestic side, these people have also been accepting of the influence of the P45 rogues, who want to justify their own history by our demise of moving from timeline 1 over to timeline 2, the catastrophe. And so the differences between the Majestic group, some of which there have been these Luciferians mixed in, and the true Illuminati group, and they're not even really true Illuminati. I mean, that's a word that comes back meaning enlightened ones, and these people are not enlightened. They're simply under the influence of a false light. That the differences between the two then have raised itself to rancor, even though they share much in common with each other. However, on the Majestic side, you have a lot of God-fearing people too. A lot, and I'm not talking about specifically here the 12. I'm talking about the line people, the people that we've worked with. Good people to the bone, to the soul, who want nothing but good for the world.
so basically what you're talking about is there seems to be an alliance between, for lack of a better word, the so-called Illuminati group that is satanic followers, and the P45s, what you call the P45s, and the Majestic group, which even though it has some members from the Illuminati, basically is siding with the P52s.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call them I would say that they are Freemasons who have accepted the Luciferian influence. In other words, I personally disagree with it. The Luciferian influence, but are still acting as good people.
For the benefit of humanity.
For the benefit of humanity, exactly.
Level.
And then there are some that I've interacted with who are involved with the so-called true Illuminati in Europe that are God-fearing people too. There's dirty coins and there's polished coins on both sides.
All right, I just wanted to share that clip with you guys so that you see kind of the weird and complex situation there is within the upper echelons of the secret military and the elites and the Illuminati Freemasons. It is a complex web, and people like to paint a broad brush over that, but it is really complicated, and it just shows you kind of what's behind the scenes with all this looking glass stuff, the people that had control of it, you know, and what has been done with it. It helps make, I think, some sense of the whole situation. Now, back to the looking glass itself. And I mentioned before that they have revealed to us the Looking Glass project in Hollywood, whether you know it or not. Now, if you remember back to some of my earlier pictures I showed you of the Looking Glass device that Dan Burish had helped artists make, like these, then it won't be a surprise to you when you see the movie Contact and you see the device that was presented in that movie to us. It is very similar in many ways, and so it shows how they reveal things to us. I mentioned that the Satanists, they, by a law that exists in the spiritual universe, they must reveal their plans concerning people, and so they must show us these things in these movies, and they do it in this secret kind of way, this way that seems like that we would dismiss, but they at least are showing it to us, so that it's almost as if they're asking our permission before they do all these things, because they're trying to fulfill that spiritual law in regards to having to divulge their evil practices. But here's a clip from the movie Contact
80%.
that shows you exactly how this device kind of looks and acts. And it is very similar to the real Looking Glass device, although the real one is obviously very small compared to this.
85%.
All bearing tips are on the profile.
90%. We're detecting some structural instability.
Confirmed. Does she hold?
We're within limits. Barely.
I'm okay to go! I'm okay to go!
My God.
5%. Okay to go! I'm okay!
100% target velocity.
Steve, picking up tremendous EMI levels around the machine. All field measurements are pegged off scale high.
Steve, we're approaching our abort limits.
Okay, go!
I hear her. I hear her.
All right, so that just shows you a little bit there of what their representation of the Looking Glass is in the movie Contact with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. Here is a animation I found somebody made online. They remodeled it in 3D and wanted to show it, but that lets you at least see it a little better. Then another movie that actually kind of reveals this thing to us is the movie Paycheck with Ben Affleck, if you've ever seen that. And at the kind of, you know, end game of this movie has to do with a future revealing device, a computer that shows people the future. Here's that clip. But you can see there, you know, it's the same kind of thought, the same kind of technology looking. It uses this idea of a gas or some xenon mist or something, you know, argon, whatever it is, to activate this device that lets them peer into the future. And just to give you a little more, there are other drawings that Dan Burish, again, has done with artists. These drawings I'm about to show you were with a guy named Michael Schratt. He put these CAD drawings together of what Project Looking Glass would actually look like in real life. And so it just gives you an idea, more detailed, of what that device looks like And this schematic is not only of the device sits in the kind of left of center there in this room, and it's a schematic of one floor of the base S4 that Bob Lazar had actually mentioned working in. And this was where these guys testified that the Project Looking Glass device resided, at least one of them, at the one that exists here in the United States at Area S4, Base S4. Here is that with these items highlighted. Now the reason these are highlighted is you'll notice it's called Alice's floor, and there's a white rabbit. Now if you are a follower of Q and the Q posts, the QAnon posts, then you know that he has mentioned Alice in Wonderland many times throughout his posts. He also has mentioned, Q has mentioned the Project Looking Glass in one post. And there are plenty of places you can go to see those posts. I'll let you do that on your own, but just note that those references likely have multiple meanings and most likely reference not only other things, but also Project Looking Glass, and the fact that Q being one of the white hats, and you remember Bill Wood mentioned in his testimony that he worked with a group of white hats he called the Oath Keepers. I truly believe that these guys are connected to the Q group in some way, or at least are may not be the Q group, but are in contact with them, because they seem to all have knowledge of this looking glass device and have been trying to use it to find a way to protect people during this situation where there's going to be this convergence of timelines. And they are obviously working towards the good timeline where there is a awakening, where people learn the truth about their world and about all the things that have been hidden from us from decades and centuries past by the power controlling elites who have run the world for so long. And so I just wanted to compile all these things. That's really the end of all the slides and pictures and videos. That's the last one I have for you, but thank you for your time in this. I think that this is probably one of the best compilations of the Looking Glass material from the actual whistleblowers that you're going to find online. So I encourage you, share this with your friends, like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and tweet this and just get the word out so that people start understanding what's going on. Because I think the more people that understand and know, that just is going to increase this great awakening that's already occurring, and it is going to be good for us. It is going to be good for America. It's going to be good for the world. And so thank you for your time, and take care of yourselves.